The sun hung merciless in the bleached sky above Dry Rock, turning Main Street into a furnace of dust and judgment. Clara Whitford stood at the edge of the crowd, her black widow's dress drinking in the heat like a punishment she'd stopped believing she deserved. 6 months since Jacob's fever took him, and still the townspeople expected her to play the grieving wife, invisible and silent. But today was different. Today, Sheriff McKenna had something to sell. "Folks," the sheriff called out, his badge catching the light like a false promise. He stood on a makeshift platform between Hendrick's General Store and the Silver Dollar Saloon, mopping his brow with a yellowed kerchief. "As y'all know, the territory's got new regulations regarding labor compensation for certain infractions." Clara pushed through the crowd, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's disapproving cluck. The matrons of Dry Rock had plenty to say about a young widow who ran her own ranch, hired her own hands, and refused to sell to Dale Morrison when he came calling with his leather ledger and snake oil smile. On the platform, a man knelt with his hands bound behind his back, even from 20 feet away. Clara could see the iron shackles had rubbed his wrists raw. His hair fell past his shoulders, black as a raven's wing against the dusty boards. He kept his eyes down, but there was nothing defeated in the set of his shoulders. "This here's Samuel Tallbear," McKenna continued, consulting a crumpled paper. "Plains Indian. About 30 years old, got caught on the wrong side of a property dispute up in Cedar Ridge. Judge says he owes 6 months' labor to pay off the damages." "What damages?" someone called out. McKenna shrugged. "Says here he was hunting on private land, spooked some cattle." Clara knew that dance. She'd seen it played out before Indian hunters following game trails their grandfathers had used, suddenly finding themselves on the wrong side of new fence lines that carved up the earth like scars. "Bidding starts at $40, McKenna announced. 6 months' labor, sunrise to sundown. He's strong, knows horses, can fix most anything that's broken." Dale Morrison stepped forward, his foreman Pike flanking him like a trained dog. Morrison's suit was too fine for the dust and heat, imported from San Francisco or maybe even further east. He had the kind of smile that made honest folk check their pockets. $50, Morrison said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. He turned that smile on the crowd. "My spread can always use another pair of hands, especially with Roundup coming." Clara had seen Morrison's hands men worked until their spirits broke, paid in company scrip only good at his overpriced store, trapped in debts that somehow never got smaller. She'd heard the stories from Lars Olsen, whose Norwegian accent thickened with anger whenever Morrison's name came up. $50 going once, McKenna called. The man on the platform, Samuel, finally raised his head. His face was all sharp angles and quiet dignity, with eyes the color of deep earth after rain. He looked straight at Morrison, and something passed between them. Not fear, recognition, maybe, or warning. $50 going twice. $70. Clara's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. The crowd turned as one, a rustle of whispers rising like disturbed birds. Morrison's smile flickered. "Mrs. Whitford," he said, tipping his hat with a mock courtesy. "I wasn't aware you were in the market for additional help." "Seems I am." She met his gaze, steady as bedrock. $70. Sheriff McKenna cleared his throat. That's a mighty generous bid. "Mrs. Whitford, you sure you—" "I know what I'm doing. Sheriff?" She reached into her canvas bag, feeling the weight of every coin she'd saved since Jacob died. Money meant for seed and supplies, for keeping the bank at bay another season. Money that might mean the difference between surviving and losing everything. But she'd seen that look in Samuel's eyes. The same look she'd worn after Jacob's funeral, when Morrison had shown up at her door with his offers and implications. The look of someone who knew the game was rigged but refused to fold. $80, Morrison countered, his voice carrying an edge now. 90? Clara didn't hesitate. The crowd pressed closer. She could feel their judgment like hands on her shoulders, the minister's wife shaking her head. The men from the saloon placing bets on how long before the widow came to her senses or came to ruin. Morrison's foreman whispered something in his ear. The rancher's face darkened like a storm building over the mountains. $100, he said. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. $100 was more than she had, more than she could scrape together even if she sold every chicken and her mother's pearl brooch. Samuel was watching her now. Not with hope, he was too careful for that, but with something that might have been curiosity. 110. The words left her mouth before wisdom could catch them. You don't have that kind of money, Morrison said flatly. That's between me and the sheriff. McKenna shifted uncomfortable on the platform. Well now, Mrs. Whitford, I'm going to need to see some guarantee. Clara pulled out her leather purse, heavy with saving, and set it on the platform with a thud. Then she unpinned the cameo at her throat Jacob's wedding gift and laid it beside the purse. Finally. She pulled out a folded paper from her bodice. Deed to the water rights on my eastern boundary, she said. That should more than cover it. Morrison's eyes lit up like a predator scenting blood. Those water rights were what he'd been after all along. The reason for his visits and his offers and his thinly veiled threats. Well then, he drawled. Seems the widow's serious about her purchase. 120. Clara felt the trap closing. If she bid higher, she'd have to mortgage the ranch itself. Morrison knew it. Everyone knew it. Tom Bradley pushed through the crowd. The doctor's son had his father's intelligent eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Mrs. Whitford, he said quietly. You don't have to. $130, Clara said, her voice carrying clear across the square. And if Mr. Morrison wants to bid against a widow trying to hire honest help, then I reckon folks here will remember that come next election when he's stumping for county commissioner. It was a gamble. Morrison had been building his political aspirations as carefully as he'd built his cattle empire. The crowd murmured, and Clara saw calculations flickering behind various eyes. Martha Garrett whispered to her husband. Even Reverend Blackwood looked thoughtful. Morrison's smile had gone brittle as old bone. Generous of you, Mrs. Whitford, to remind us all of our civic duties. He turned to McKenna. I withdraw my bid. The sheriff looked relieved. $130 going once, twice sold to Mrs. Clara Whitford. Clara's knees nearly buckled, but she kept her spine straight as she climbed the platform steps. Up close, she could see the bruises along Samuel's jaw, the dried blood at the corner of his mouth. Someone had made sure he looked the part of the dangerous Indian before putting him on display. Sheriff, she said, I'll thank you to remove those shackles now. Now hold on, Mrs. Whitford. Regulations say he's my employee now, unless you're suggesting I can't be trusted with my own hired hand. McKenna's face flushed. He fumbled for his keys, and the shackles fell away with a clatter that echoed off the storefronts. Samuel rubbed his wrists slowly, his face giving away nothing. You'll need to sign these papers, McKenna said. And there's conditions. He runs. You forfeit everything. He causes trouble. He won't. Clara didn't look at Samuel when she said it. Didn't make it about trust or faith or any of the soft things that hard people mocked. Just stated it as fact, like saying the sun would set or the rains would fail again this year. She signed where McKenna pointed, her signature firm despite the trembling in her hands. When she turned to Samuel, he was standing, taller than she'd expected, lean muscle and coiled readiness. You got a horse? She asked. He shook his head once. Can you ride? The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Yes, ma'am. Then we'll take one of mine. Ranch is 6 miles north. Follow the cottonwoods along Dry Creek. She paused, choosing her words like selecting stones for a wall. Supper's at sundown. We work dawn to dusk, but Sundays are your own. Pay is food. shelter, and respect. That acceptable? He studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A fool, a savior, or just another white woman thinking she could buy absolution with good intentions. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with careful pronunciation that spoke of mission schools and forced education. Clara turned to face the crowd one last time. Morrison stood with his arms crossed, that snake oil smile back in place. "Everything has a price, Mrs. Whitford," he called out. "Everything and everyone." "Maybe so," she replied. "But some things aren't for sale." She collected her papers from McKenna, leaving the deed to the water rights. That was Morrison's real victory, and they both knew it. Come drought season, she'd feel the loss keenly. But as she walked through the parting crowd with Samuel following at a careful distance, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Tom Bradley caught her arm at the edge of the square. "That was brave," he said quietly. "Or foolish. Likely both." She glanced back at Samuel, who stood waiting with the patience of someone who'd learned that rushing only brought trouble faster. "You know Morrison won't let this go." "I know." Tom's face was troubled. "My father would help if you need—" "I'll manage." She softened the rejection with a small smile. "But thank you." As she headed for the livery stable, she heard the whispers starting already. By nightfall, the story would have grown and twisted, becoming something ugly or romantic or cautionary, depending on who told it. The widow Whitford and her purchased Indian, the fool woman who'd squandered her savings on principle. Let them talk. She had a ranch to run, a new hand to settle, and water rights to figure out how to live without. The sun was already sliding toward the mountains, painting the dust red as blood or rust or the endings of things. But endings, Clara had learned, were just beginnings wearing mourning clothes. And sometimes, if you were careful and lucky and stubborn enough, you could tear off that black fabric and find something worth saving underneath. She found Samuel by the horses, running his freed hands along a bay mare's neck with the touch of someone who spoke the language of frightened things. He looked up when she approached, and for the first time, something like warmth flickered in those dark eyes. "Ready?" she asked. He swung up onto the mare's back with fluid grace. No saddle needed. "Yes, ma'am." "It's Clara," she said. "Just Clara." He nodded once, filing that away with whatever else he was collecting about this strange day, and the strange woman who'd just gambled her future on a principle most folks had forgotten existed. As they rode out of Dry Rock, the sun at their backs and the long shadows reaching toward home, Clara allowed herself one glance back. Morrison still stood in the street, watching them go. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his attention like a promise. "Everything has a price," he'd said. Maybe so, but Clara had paid hers willingly, and that made all the difference. The cottonwoods whispered secrets as they passed, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out wild and free and unowned. Samuel heard it too, his head tilting slightly toward the sound. For just a moment, the tight line of his shoulders eased. It was a small thing, but small things, Clara knew, were how you built a life worth living. Stone by stone, day by day, choice by careful choice. The ranch appeared on the horizon, humble and weathered, and hers, at least for now, at least for today. And today, she decided, was enough to start with. The road to the ranch wound through stands of cottonwood that threw dappled shadows across the dusty trail. Clara rode ahead on her sorrel gelding, back straight despite the weariness pulling at her bones, behind her. Samuel guided the bay mare with subtle shifts of weight, reading the land with the instinct of someone who'd learned to see danger in every shadow. They didn't speak. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, full of questions neither was ready to ask. Clara found herself stealing glances back, watching how he moved with the horse as if they shared the same spine. The bruises on his jaw had darkened to purple-black in the fading light. The ranch materialized slowly, revealing itself in pieces, a weathered barn missing half its shingles, fence posts leaning drunkenly where the posts had rotted, the main house squatting low and stubborn against the landscape. Jacob had built it with his own hands, back when they'd both believed in futures that stretched endlessly forward. Clara dismounted at the gate, her bones protesting after the long day. "Welcome to the Whitford Ranch," she said, trying not to hear the irony in her own voice. "Such as it is." Samuel slid from the mare's back, his eyes taking inventory. She watched him catalog the broken places, the empty water trough, the garden gate hanging by one hinge, the well pump that hadn't drawn water in 2 months. "The well?" he asked, his first real question since leaving town. "Mechanism's broken. Been hauling water from the creek, but with the water rights gone." She let the sentence die unfinished. He walked to the pump, circled it like a man-reading sign. His fingers traced the metal housing, found the joint where the rod connected to the cylinder below. Tools. "In the barn," she hesitated. "You know pumps?" "Some." He straightened. Met her eyes directly for the first time since she'd bought his freedom. "Learned at the mission school. Before. Such a small word to contain so much history." Clara knew better than to push at closed doors. "I'll show you where things are," she said. "Then we'll see about supper." The barn smelled of old hay and older dreams. Clara lit the lantern hanging by the door, illuminating Jacob's tools arranged neat as a prayer along the workbench. Samuel moved among them with careful reverence, picking up a wrench, testing its weight. "Your husband?" he asked, noting the careful organization. Fever took him last winter?" She kept her voice steady, factual. "He was particular about his tools." Samuel nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "I'll take care of them." They moved through the small ranch, Clara pointing out the boundaries, the chicken coop that needed repair, the smokehouse that still functioned. Samuel absorbed it all with dark eyes that missed nothing. At the main house, she hesitated on the porch. "There's a room off the barn. Used to be for hired hands. Has its own stove, bed, necessaries. That suit you?" "Yes." She'd expected that. Still, she found herself saying, "Supper's in an hour. You'll eat at the table like civilized folk." Something flickered in his eyes' surprise. Maybe, or warning. "Mrs. Whitford." "Clara." She turned to face him fully. "You work for me, not Morrison or anyone else in town. On this ranch, you're a hired hand. Nothing more or less. That means you eat at my table, use the front door, and anybody who has a problem with that can take it up with me in Jacob's Winchester." The corner of his mouth twitched again, that almost smile. "Yes, ma'am. Clara." She left him to settle in and returned to the house. The kitchen felt too large with just her in it, the way it had every night since Jacob's passing. She put water onto heat-hauled bucket by bucket from the creek that morning and set about making something substantial. Salt pork and beans, cornbread if the starter hadn't gone bad, preserved peaches from last summer's bounty. Through the window, she watched Samuel emerge from the barn with tools in hand, heading for the pump. The last of the day's light caught on his hair as he knelt in the dust, already working. By the time she called him for supper, full dark had settled over the ranch. He appeared at the door like a shadow given form, hat in hand, hair tied back neat. "Any luck?" she asked, gesturing him to the table. "Need parts. The leather valve at the bottom's rotted through, but I can make something work, if you've got hide and wire." "Got both." She set a plate before him, piled high. "Eat." They ate in companionable silence at first, just the clink of forks and the pop of wood in the stove. Finally, Samuel set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Why?" She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Morrison's had his eye on this place since Jacob died. Figured if he couldn't buy me out, he'd wait for me to fail." Your sale gave him another angle to play. That's not what I meant. She met his steady gaze. I know what it's like to have folks think they own you, to have them look at you and see something less than human, just because you don't fit their notion of proper. She touched her throat where the cameo used to rest. After Jacob died, Morrison came calling before the dirt had settled on the grave, made it clear what kind of arrangement he had in mind. When I refused, she shrugged. Well, a woman alone draws certain assumptions. Samuel's jaw tightened. He hurt you? No, nothing so direct. Morrison's too smart for that. But there's more than one way to put pressure on a person. The water rights. Among other things. She pushed the peaches toward him. Your turn. Cedar Ridge, what really happened? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of careful control. Followed an elk trail I've used since I was young. Land belonged to my mother's people. Once, new owner decided I was rustling. No evidence, but my word against his. He spread his hands. Judge gave me a choice. 6 months labor or 6 years prison. And you chose labor. Prison's just another kind of death for Indians. Slower, maybe, but just as sure. Clara poured coffee. Strong and black. Well, you're not in prison now. And long as you're on my land, nobody's going to put you back there. You can't promise that. Watch me. He studied her over the rim of his cup. You always this stubborn. Yes. She allowed herself a small smile. Jacob used to say I could teach rocks about holding firm. Smart man. He was. The grief had gentled some. No longer sharp enough to cut. Taught me everything about ranching. Everything except how to do it alone. You're not alone now. The simple statement hung between them, carrying more weight than its words could hold. Clara felt something ease in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. No, she agreed. I suppose I'm not. After supper, she helped him carry supplies to the hands' quarters. The room was sparse but clean bed with a corn husk mattress, pot-belly stove, small table and chair. She'd aired it out that morning on impulse, as if some part of her had known. Pump won't fix itself tonight, she said. Rest. Dawn comes early. He set down the blankets she'd provided. Clara. He paused, choosing words carefully. In town, you gave up those water rights. I did. Drought's coming. Without water access? I know. She met his concern with steady calm. But there's more than one way to find water, and more than one kind of drought that can kill a place. Understanding dawned in his eyes. The town, Morrison. He's bleeding dry rock slow, buying up land, controlling water, setting folks against each other. Today, she shook her head. Today I could either save my ranch or remember why it's worth saving. Couldn't do both. Most would have chosen the ranch. Most would have been smarter. She turned to go, paused at the doorway. That elk trail you mentioned, does it cross my northern boundary? Might. Interesting. Well, good night, Samuel. Good night, Clara. Walking back to the main house, she felt the weight of the day settling into her bones. In the kitchen, she washed the dishes by lamplight, her reflection wavering in the dark window glass. A woman past youth's first bloom, worn down by work and loss, gambling everything on principle and a stranger's potential. But when she glanced toward the barn, she saw light in the window of the hands' quarters, for the first time in 6 months. She wasn't alone on the ranch. That had to count for something. She prepared for bed, then found herself drawn to Jacob's study. His ledgers still lay open on the desk, columns of numbers that no longer added up to survival. But there, in the bottom drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, the one thing she hadn't been able to bring herself to sell. She unwrapped Jacob's Colt .45, feeling the familiar weight. He'd taught her to shoot the month after they'd married, insisting a frontier wife needed to know. The metal was cold under her fingers, but her hands remembered the shape. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she'd give it to Samuel. A man needed to be able to defend himself, especially with Morrison circling like a buzzard. The thought of the rancher made her jaw clench. He'd expect her to come crawling once the reality of losing those water rights sank in. Expected her to fail, to need saving, to finally accept the place he'd carved out for her in his vision of the valley. He'd be waiting a long time. Outside, a coyote howled, answered by another across the distance. The sound raised goosebumps on her arms, wild and defiant in the darkness. She thought of Samuel, learning to trust walls again after who knew how long under open sky, of the careful way he'd said her name, like testing the truth of it. Everything had changed today. The safe path she'd been walking, the widow's path of slow decline and eventual surrender, had crumbled under her feet. In its place stretched something unknown and dangerous and alive with possibility. Clara blew out the lamp and climbed the stairs to her empty bed. Through the window, stars punctured the black sky like promises. Somewhere in the darkness, the pump stood waiting for resurrection. The ranch held its breath around her, waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. She closed her eyes and let herself imagine water flowing again, the garden green despite Morrison's theft. Samuel's hands sure on the tools as they rebuilt what had broken. It was a dangerous thing. Hope. But then, she'd already proven herself partial to dangerous things. Sleep, when it finally came, was deep and dreamless. And if she woke once in the night to the sound of footsteps on the porch, just checking, just making sure she was safe, well, that was a secret the darkness could keep. Dawn would come soon enough, bringing work and challenge and the slow building of trust between strangers bound by necessity and choice. But for now, Clara Whitford slept sound in her bed, no longer alone on the land she'd sworn to keep. The moon traced its path overhead, and the ranch settled into watchful quiet. In the barn, a new guardian kept his own vigil, learning the sounds of his unexpected home, and in the space between them, something wordless and essential began to take root, stubborn as sagebrush, patient as stone. The water would flow again. They'd make sure of it. The thunder of hoofbeats woke Clara from restless sleep. She lay still, listening to the rhythm. Too many horses, moving too fast for honest business at this hour. The clock on the mantel chimed 3 times. Nobody rode hard at 3 in the morning unless they meant trouble. She slipped from bed and pulled on her wrapper, then reached for Jacob's Winchester propped in the corner. Through the window, she could see torches bobbing like fireflies from hell, casting wild shadows across the yard. 5 riders, maybe 6, their faces hidden by darkness and bad intentions. The pounding came at the door, violent enough to rattle the hinges. Mrs. Whitford. The voice belonged to Josiah Harmon, Morrison's foreman's brother, a mean piece of work who'd found religion the way some men found whiskey, using it to justify every cruel impulse. "Open up, we got business to discuss." Clara checked the rifle's load and descended the stairs, bare feet silent on worn wood. Through the door, she called out clear and steady, "State your business from where you are. Mr. Harmon, it's too late for social calls." "Too late," another voice, this one belonging to Reverend Blackwood himself. "It's never too late to save a soul from damnation. Mrs. Whitford, we've come to help you see reason. I see fine in daylight. Reverend, come back then." A torch sailed through the air, landing too close to the chicken coop for comfort. The birds erupted in panicked squawks. "Your soul's in mortal danger," Blackwood intoned, his preacher's voice carrying across the yard. "Harboring heathens, living in sin." The barn door creaked open. Samuel emerged like a shadow given form, shirtless and barefoot but carrying himself with a kind of stillness that suggested violence held in check. He kicked the torch away from the coop, grinding it out under his heel. "There he is." Someone sounded like Pete Hutchkins pointed a shaking finger. "The savage she bought living here like a hired hand," Clara interrupted, opening the door but keeping the rifle visible. "Which is what he is." Now get off my property before I fill your hides with rock salt." Josiah Harmon dismounted, swagger in every step despite the Winchester aimed at his chest. Now, Mrs. Whitford, no need for threats. We're here as concerned citizens is all. Word is you got this Indian living here improper-like. That ain't fitting for a Christian woman." "What's not fitting is 6 grown men riding up to a widow's home in the dead of night." Clara stepped onto the porch, nightgown and wrapper be damned. "Samuel sleeps in the hands' quarters, works sunrise to sundown, and minds his own business, which is more than I can say for the lot of you." "He's corrupting you." Reverend Blackwood dismounted his gray mare, black coat flapping like buzzard wings. "I can see it in your eyes, woman. The defiance, the unwomanly pride. What you see is a rancher protecting her property." She worked the rifle's lever, the sound sharp in the still air. "Now, move along." More torches flared to life. Pete Hutchkins had his lit and ready, arm cocked back to throw. Maybe a little fire will cleanse this place of its wickedness. The torch flew in a high arc toward the barn. Samuel moved faster than thought, leaping to intercept it. He caught the burning brand mid-flight, hissing as flames licked his palm, then hurled it back into the dirt at Hutchkins's feet. "You saw that." Hutchkins' voice climbed toward hysteria. "Ain't natural, the way he moves devil's work." "Only devil here came riding up with torches," Samuel said, his first words since emerging. His voice carried calm authority despite the burn on his palm. "Man wants to talk about God. He doesn't need fire to do it." Reverend Blackwood's face contorted. "You dare speak of God? Heathen you who worship false spirits and practice dark ways?" "I was raised Methodist," Samuel replied evenly. "Mission school for 8 years. Can recite scripture well as any man here. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks." Isaiah. Don't recall the verse about bringing torches to widows' homes. The silence stretched taut. Clara saw uncertainty flicker across several faces. Tom Bradley's words from that afternoon echoed brave or foolish. Maybe both. "Enough!" A new voice cut through the tension. Sheriff McKenna rode into the yard, badge glinting in the torchlight. "What in the hell is going on here?" "Sheriff," Blackwood turned eagerly. "Thank the Lord, we've come to address a moral situation. What I see is criminal trespass and attempted arson." McKenna's voice was weary but firm. "Mrs. Whitford, you want to press charges?" Clara felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Press charges and make enemies of half the town. Let it go and invite more of the same. She caught Samuel's eye, saw him give an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "No charges," she said finally. "If these gentlemen leave now and don't come back—" "You heard her." McKenna turned his horse to face the riders. "Go on home. And Josiah Pete, I catch either of you out here again. It's a night in jail and a talk with the circuit judge." The men grumbled but began to disperse. Reverend Blackwood mounted last, his face twisted with righteous fury. "This isn't over, Mrs. Whitford. God's judgment. God's judgment is his to give." Clara cut him off. "Not yours to deliver. Now get off my land." They watched the riders disappear into the darkness, torchlight fading like dying stars. McKenna lingered, shifting uncomfortable in his saddle. "Clara," he said quietly, "they're not wrong about how this looks. You've got to know that. What I know is that I hired a hand to work my ranch. Everything else is gossip and spite." "Maybe so, but gossip and spite can burn just as hot as those torches." He touched his hat. "I'll keep an ear out, but you be careful." After he left, Clara found herself alone in the yard with Samuel. He stood cradling his burned hand, watching her with those careful eyes. "Let me see," she said. He hesitated, then extended his palm. The burn was ugly but not severe, blistering across the heel of his hand where he'd caught the torch. Without thinking, she took his hand in both of hers, examining the damage by the light spilling from the kitchen door. "Come inside. I've got salve for that." "Clara." "Inside." She turned without waiting for argument, heard him follow after a moment's pause. In the kitchen, she lit the lamp and fetched her medicine box. Samuel sat at the table, looking out of place and yet somehow right. She worked in silence, cleaning the burn with cool water, applying salve with gentle fingers. "This will scar," she said. "I have others." She glanced up, caught something in his expression, old pain, carefully managed. Her fingers stilled on his hand. "They were wrong. You know, what they said about you." "Were they?" His voice held no bitterness, just tired acceptance. "I'm Indian, living on a white woman's ranch. In their minds, that's all that matters." "Well, they're idiots." She wrapped clean linen around his palm, tying it off neat. "And they don't speak for everyone. The Olsons' next ranch over Lars and Ingrid, they're good people. They'll judge you by your work, not your blood. And the others." She met his eyes squarely. "We'll have to go through me first." Something shifted in his expression. A wall coming down brick by careful brick. "That's what worries me." Before she could respond, a soft knock came at the door. They both tensed, but the voice that followed was feminine and accented. "Mrs. Clara is Ingrid Olson. I bring coffee cake and concern." Clara almost laughed at the relief flooding through her. She opened the door to find her Norwegian neighbor, graying hair in a hasty braid, carrying a covered basket despite the hour. "Ingrid, what are you?" "We see the torches from our window. Lars, he wants to ride over with the rifle, but I say no. Wait for morning. But then I cannot sleep, so—" She lifted the basket. "I bake. Is good for the nerves." Her sharp blue eyes found Samuel at the table, took in the bandaged hand. Without hesitation, she bustled inside, setting the basket down and pulling back the cloth to reveal golden coffee cake still warm from the oven. "You must be Mr. Samuel. I am Ingrid. You eat." She was already cutting generous slices. "Men who catch fire for others, they need good food." Samuel looked poleaxed by the motherly invasion. "Ma'am, I—" "Eat." She pushed a plate in front of him, then served Clara. "Is good you are here. Clara needs help with the ranch. Jacob, God rest him. He would want this." She settled at the table like it was her own kitchen. "Those men with the torches, Pa, they know nothing of Christ's love, only fear and hatred." "You could have trouble," Samuel said carefully, "being friendly with me." Ingrid snorted. "Let them try. My Lars has the temper of a bear and twice the strength, and I myself am not so gentle when protecting neighbors." She patted Clara's hand. "We stand together. Yes is the only way." They ate coffee cake and drank strong tea while dawn crept closer. Ingrid shared news from town Morrison was buying up more land. 2 more families pushed out by debt. The church was splitting, some following Blackwood's harsh gospel while others sought gentler paths. "Change comes," she said, gathering her things as first light touched the windows. "Slow, maybe, but comes all the same." After she left, Clara and Samuel stood awkward in the kitchen, the intimacy of the night giving way to morning's reality. "I should check the animals," he said. "I should, yes." She smoothed her wrapper, suddenly aware of her state of undress. "Samuel, what you did tonight?" "Was my job protecting the ranch." "It was more than that." He paused at the door, silhouetted against the growing light. "Maybe, but that's all it can be. Clara, you know that." She did know. Knew it in her bones, in the ache of loneliness she carried, in the way the town would turn if she crossed certain lines. But knowing and accepting were different animals entirely. "For now," she said quietly. He studied her for a long moment, something like hope warring with caution in his eyes. Then he touched his hat and was gone. leaving her alone with the memory of his hand in hers and the taste of sweetness on her tongue. Outside, the ranch stirred to life, unaware or uncaring of the night's violence. But Clara knew better. The torches had been a warning, a test. Morrison and his allies wouldn't stop there. She climbed the stairs to dress for the day's work, pausing at Jacob's study. Time to teach Samuel to shoot. She decided, if war was coming to her doorstep, she'd make sure they were ready. The morning sun painted the ranch gold and red, beautiful and harsh as the land itself. Somewhere in the barn, Samuel began the day's repairs, the ring of hammer on metal steady as a heartbeat. Clara touched the Winchester's stock, then reached for her work clothes. Whatever came next, they'd face it standing. Together. The smoke rose black against the afternoon sky, a pillar of destruction that could be seen for miles. Clara was in the garden when she spotted it, and her blood turned to ice. That was the Garrett place Paul and Martha's ranch, where little Emma played with her cloth dolls and helped her mother gather eggs. "Fire!" she shouted, dropping her hoe. Samuel emerged from the barn at a run, saw the smoke, and was already moving for the horses. "The Garretts," Clara said, swinging onto her mare. "They've got a 6-year-old girl." They rode hard, the horses' hooves eating up the distance. Other neighbors converged from all directions, the Olsons from the north, Doc Bradley and Tom from town. Even some of Morrison's hands, their employer notably absent. Fire didn't care about property lines or prejudices. It consumed everything equally. The scene was chaos. The Garrett barn was fully engulfed, flames licking up toward the hayloft where they stored the winter feed. Paul Garrett stood too close to the inferno, screaming his daughter's name, while Martha was on her knees in the dirt, held back by Mrs. Patterson. "She went to get her doll," Martha sobbed. "Emma's in the loft. My baby's in there." The heat was overwhelming, driving everyone back. The entrance to the barn was a wall of flame, the structure groaning as supports began to fail. Tom Bradley had his arms around Paul, physically restraining him from running into certain death. "The ladder!" someone shouted. "Round the back!" But the ladder was already burning, fallen away from the loft window, through the smoke. Clara could see a small figure at that window, Emma's white dress like a ghost against the darkness. Samuel didn't hesitate. He stripped off his shirt, dunked it in the water trough, and wrapped it around his head and shoulders. Before anyone could stop him, he was running. "No!" Clara heard herself scream, but he was already gone, disappearing into the smoke at the barn's side where the flames hadn't fully taken hold. The crowd fell silent except for Martha's sobs. 1 heartbeat, 2. The roof beam cracked like thunder, sending up a shower of sparks. 3 heartbeats, 4. Then movement at the loft window. Samuel appeared. Emma clutched against his chest, her arms wrapped tight around his neck, but the window was 20 feet up, the ladder gone, the wall below starting to burn. "Jump!" Sheriff McKenna had arrived, was organizing men with a stretched canvas. "We'll catch you." Samuel looked down, calculating. The canvas seemed impossibly small from that height, the men holding it already backing away from the increasing heat. He adjusted his grip on Emma, whispered something in her ear. Then he turned his back to the window and kicked out hard, shattering what remained of the frame. He fell backward, curling his body around Emma's, taking the impact as they hit the canvas. It tore under their combined weight, but it slowed them enough. They rolled apart on the ground, Samuel's back and shoulders scored with burns, Emma crying but miraculously whole. Martha flew to her daughter, gathering her up in desperate arms. Paul fell to his knees beside them, his face working between joy and anguish. Doc Bradley was already kneeling beside Samuel, assessing the damage with gentle hands. "Get him to my office," the doctor ordered. "Tom, ride ahead and prepare things. These burns need immediate attention." "No." Samuel struggled to sit up, wincing. "The barn is gone," Lars Olson said firmly, helping him to his feet. But the child lives is enough. The crowd that had gathered stood in a strange tableau. These were the same people who'd whispered about Clara's purchased savage, who'd crossed streets to avoid meeting Samuel's eyes. Now they watched him with something approaching awe. It was Mrs. Patterson who moved first, the minister's wife, proper as starched lace and twice as rigid, walked directly to Samuel and did something that stopped every conversation cold. She kissed him on the cheek. "God bless you," she said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "God bless you for saving that baby." Paul Garrett stood slowly, his farmer's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He'd been one of the voices supporting Morrison. Clara knew, one of those who'd said Indians had no place mixing with decent folk. He crossed the space between them like a man walking to his own judgment. The crowd held its breath. Then Paul extended his hand. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough with smoke and emotion. "I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry for it. You saved my Emma. I'll never forget that. Never." Samuel, swaying slightly from pain and exhaustion, took the offered hand. "Anyone would have—" "No." Paul gripped harder. "They wouldn't. They didn't." His eyes swept the crowd, landing briefly on several faces. "You did." More people pressed forward then. Men who'd stood silent while Reverend Blackwood preached his poison now offered their hands. Women who'd clutched their skirts aside when Samuel passed now touched his arms gently, murmuring blessings and thanks. "Enough," Clara said, seeing him sway again. "He needs medical attention. Tom, help me get him in the wagon." As they loaded Samuel carefully, trying not to aggravate his burns, Reverend Blackwood arrived on his gray mare. He took in the scene, the destroyed barn. The crowd gathered around Samuel, his own parishioners treating the Indian like a hero. "What happened here?" His voice carried its usual thunder. "A miracle," Ingrid Olson said clearly, "though not the kind you preach about. Reverend—" Blackwood's face darkened. "Be careful of false prophets and wolves in sheep's clothing." "Only wolf I see," Paul Garrett interrupted, his voice carrying new steel, "is the one trying to turn neighbors against each other while a child could have died." He turned to the crowd. "We're rebuilding this barn. Saturday. Everyone's welcome to help, and I mean everyone?" His eyes found Samuel in the wagon. "Especially the man who saved my daughter." The murmur of agreement that ran through the crowd was like water through a broken dam. Something had shifted. Clara realized. Not everything there were still hard faces, still those who turned away. But enough, maybe enough. At Doc Bradley's office, she helped Tom and the doctor tend to Samuel's burns. They were bad but not devastating, second degree across his back and shoulders. Painful but healable. He bore the treatment stoically, only his clenched jaw betraying the pain. "You're lucky," Doc Bradley said, applying salve with practiced hands. "These could have been much worse." "Emma?" Samuel asked. "Scared but unharmed," Tom assured him. "You protected her well." When they were alone for a moment, Tom fetching more bandages, Clara found herself studying Samuel's face. The careful mask he usually wore had cracked, showing something raw underneath. "You could have died," she said quietly. "So could she." "That's not—" She stopped, tried again. "Your life matters too." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "To who?" "To me." The words hung between them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. "To the Garretts now. To more people than you think." Tom returned before Samuel could respond, but something in his eyes had softened, like ice beginning its spring thaw. They returned to the ranch as sunset painted the sky. A small group had gathered at Clara's gate, the Olsons, the Garretts with Emma clutching a new doll, several other families. They'd brought food, supplies, and something more precious, acceptance. "For the hero," Martha said, pressing a basket into Clara's hands. "And to say we'd be proud to help with your ranch work, if you'll have us." The impromptu gathering lasted until full dark. Emma, recovered from her ordeal with the resilience of childhood, insisted on sitting next to Samuel at the table, chattering about her dolls and asking if his burns hurt. He answered her gently. This man who'd been bound in iron just days before, now treated as an honored guest. But Clara noticed the undercurrents too, the way some neighbors hadn't come, the sidelong glances from those who had, as if still reconciling what they'd been told with what they'd seen, and threading through it all. The absence of Dale Morrison and his faction, a silence that felt like a brewing storm. When the last wagon rolled away, Clara found Samuel standing by the corral, watching the stars. The bandages made his silhouette strange, bulky across the shoulders. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I caught fire." A pause. "Worth it, though, to see that little girl smile." Clara moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. "Things will be different now. Some of them. Anyway." Different doesn't always mean better. He turned to look at her. "Morrison won't like this. Won't like losing control of the narrative." "I know." She thought of the rancher's cold eyes, his careful plans. "But that's tomorrow's problem." "And tonight's problem," Clara thought, was the way moonlight caught in his hair, the way her heart had stopped when he ran into that burning barn, the growing certainty that hiring him had changed more than just her ranch's prospects. "Tonight," she said carefully. "We're safe. You're alive. Emma's alive. The rest—" She shrugged. "The rest we'll handle as it comes." He nodded, accepting that wisdom, then surprising her. "Thank you for the doctoring, for standing by me with the crowd. Partners. Remember, we stand together or not at all." "Partners." He tested the word like new wine. "Yes." They stood in companionable silence, watching stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, a nightbird called. The ranch settled around them, peaceful for now, holding its breath for whatever came next. Inside the house, cooling on the kitchen table, sat the food their neighbors had brought. Bread and preserves, smoked meat and pickled vegetables, offerings of community. Tentative bridges across old divides. It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough to erase years of prejudice or prevent what Morrison might do next. But it was a start. And as Clara finally bid Samuel good night and walked back to her empty house, she thought perhaps that's all anyone could ask for. A start, a chance, a moment when people chose their better angels, even if only for a while. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Morrison would move against them. She was certain. The town would continue to whisper and judge. The drought would deepen. And without those water rights, every day would be a battle. But tonight, a child slept safe in her bed because a man had chosen courage over safety. Tonight, barriers had cracked if not crumbled. Tonight, hope had wings. It would have to be enough. The morning of the barn raising dawned clear and bright, with a crispness in the air that promised autumn's approach. Clara stood on her porch, watching wagons converge on the Garrett property like streams feeding into a river. The whole valley seemed to be in motion, carrying lumber and tools and hope. Samuel emerged from the barn, his movements still careful from the healing burns. He'd insisted on working despite Doc Bradley's protests, fashioning leather hinges and checking measurements with the patience of a master craftsman. "Ready?" Clara asked, noting how he favored his left shoulder. "Ready." He climbed onto the wagon seat beside her, a gesture that would have scandalized the town a week ago. Now it merely drew curious glances rather than outright hostility. Progress, she supposed, came in small steps. The Garrett place hummed with activity. Men unloaded timber while women set up long tables for the noon meal. Children ran between the workers' legs, their laughter bright as bird song. Where the old barn had stood, the foundation stones waited clean and level, ready for rebirth. Paul Garrett met them at the gate, his handshake firm when he gripped Samuel's hand. "I've been telling folks about your idea for the corner joints," he said. "Johnson thinks it's too fancy, but I figure the man who saved my daughter knows a thing or two about keeping things standing." Samuel's design was elegant in its simplicity, a mortise and tenon system he'd learned from his mother's people, who built structures meant to sway with prairie winds rather than fight them. As he explained it to the gathered men, Clara watched faces shift from skepticism to interest to admiration. "Never seen anything like it," admitted Henry Johnson, the town's usual lead carpenter. "But damned if it doesn't make sense. Show us how it's done." And just like that, Samuel became the unofficial foreman of the barn raising. He moved among the workers with quiet authority, demonstrating cuts, adjusting angles, teaching hands more used to rough work the art of precision. Tom Bradley proved an eager student, his educated fingers quick to grasp the concepts. "Your man knows his business," Sheriff McKenna commented to Clara, accepting a cup of water from the ladies' table. "He's not my man," Clara said automatically, then caught the knowing look in McKenna's eye. "He's a skilled worker who deserves respect for his knowledge." "That he is." McKenna watched Samuel guide a beam into place, several men following his lead without question. "Morrison's not here." "I noticed." "He's in town, meeting with the railroad surveyor. Word is they're planning a spur line through the valley." Clara's stomach tightened. A railroad meant progress for some, destruction for others. It meant land values shifting, water rights becoming even more precious, small ranchers pushed out by those with deeper pockets. "Through whose land?" she asked, though she suspected the answer. "Haven't announced the route yet, but I'd bet my badge it'll favor certain interests over others." Before Clara could respond, a commotion arose near the frame. One of the main supports had shifted, threatening to bring down the entire eastern wall. Men scrambled back as the beam groaned and tilted. Samuel didn't hesitate. He barked quick orders, positioning men with guide ropes while he and Tom Bradley scrambled up the frame itself, working in perfect coordination. They maneuvered the beam back into position while others secured it from below. "That's got it," Paul Garrett called out. "Well done!" A cheer went up from the workers. Someone, it sounded like Lars Olsen, started a work song in his native Norwegian. Others joined in with the English verses they knew, creating a rhythm that matched the swing of hammers and the bite of saws. Clara found herself swept into the meal preparations, working alongside women who'd barely acknowledged her a week ago. Martha Garrett stayed close, her gratitude expressing itself in small touches and shared smiles. "I haven't slept well since the fire," Martha confided as they sliced bread. "Keep dreaming I hear Emma calling, but then I remember she's safe, and who made her so." She glanced toward where Samuel worked. "Paul's talking about hiring him for harvest, if you can spare him." "That's Samuel's choice to make," Clara said carefully. "I don't own him." "No," Martha agreed. "But you saw his worth when the rest of us were blind. That matters." The noon meal was a celebration in itself. Long tables groaned under the weight of food-fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, pies of every description. Reverend Blackwood said grace, his words notably lacking their usual fire and brimstone. Perhaps even he felt the change in the air, the community knitting itself back together strand by careful strand. Samuel found himself seated between Tom Bradley and Paul Garrett, included in the easy conversation of men who'd worked hard together. Clara caught his eye across the crowd, saw his small smile of wonder at this unexpected acceptance. "To Samuel Tall Bear." Paul stood suddenly, raising his glass of cider. "Who taught us new ways can make old things stronger, and who brought my daughter home?" The toast rippled through the gathering. To Samuel. Even some who'd been silent raised their glasses, peer pressure and genuine emotion creating a tide of acknowledgement. Samuel stood slowly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but understanding the moment's importance. "To community," he offered in return, "and to building things that last." The work resumed with renewed energy. By late afternoon, The barn skeleton stood complete against the sky, proud and sturdy with its unusual joints that would flex rather than break under pressure. Women began packing up the meal remnants while children played in the sawdust piles. Clara was helping load empty dishes when she noticed the riders approaching 6 men in city clothes, Morrison at their head. The easy atmosphere curdled like milk in heat. Morrison dismounted with theatrical slowness, surveying the scene like a king reviewing peasants. His companions stayed mounted, hands resting too casually near their weapons. "Well, well," Morrison's voice carried across the suddenly quiet gathering. "A barn raising. How quaint. I do hope you secured the proper permits from the county." Paul stepped forward, jaw set. "We don't need permits to help a neighbor. Morrison?" "Actually, you do." Morrison produced a paper from his coat with a flourish. "New county ordinance, passed just yesterday. All structures over a certain size require approval from the Planning Commission." His smile was sharp as glass. "Which I happen to chair." "That's not—" Sheriff McKenna started forward, but Morrison cut him off. "Entirely legal. Sheriff, you can check with Judge Harper if you like. In the meantime," he gestured to his men, "I'm afraid we'll need to halt construction until proper procedures are followed." "You can't do this!" Martha Garrett's voice shook with fury. "We need this barn for winter feed storage." "Then I suggest you file the proper paperwork." Morrison's gaze found Samuel in the crowd, and his smile widened. "Of course, there might be complications. The county has certain standards about who can supervise construction, educational requirements, citizenship documentation." The threat was clear as water. Samuel stepped down from the frame slowly, every eye following his movement. He walked directly to Morrison, stopping just outside arm's reach. "You want to punish them for accepting me," he said quietly. "Take issue with me directly. Leave these good people out of it." "Good people," Morrison laughed. "Good people don't harbor. Choose your next words careful-like." Clara had moved to stand beside Samuel, and she wasn't alone. Tom Bradley flanked his other side, then Paul Garrett, then Lars Olsen, one by one. The crowd shifted, forming a wall of bodies between Morrison and the new barn. Morrison's face flushed dark. "You think this changes anything? You think playing hero to a child makes you fit to mix with decent folk?" "I think," Samuel said with that same deadly quiet, "that decent folk are the ones who build instead of tear down, who help instead of hinder, who judge a man by his actions, not their fears." "Pretty words." Morrison's hand twitched toward his coat. "But the law. The law says you need a majority vote of the commission for enforcement." Tom Bradley interrupted. His young face was set with determination. "My father sits on that commission, Mr. Morrison, as does Mr. Garrett here, and Mrs. Henderson. I doubt you'll find your majority." Morrison's mask finally slipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath. "You're making a mistake, all of you. When the railroad comes through." "When the railroad comes through," Sheriff McKenna said firmly, "it'll find a community that stands together. Now, unless you're here to help raise this barn, I suggest you move along. This is private property, and you're trespassing." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Morrison's men shifted restlessly, awaiting orders. The crowd pressed closer together, fear and determination mixing in equal measure. Then Emma Garrett pushed through the forest of adult legs, clutching her new doll. She marched straight up to Samuel and took his hand with 6-year-old certainty. "Mr. Samuel," she announced in her piping voice. "Mama says you're staying for supper. She made apple pie special." The tension broke like a fever. Someone, maybe Ingrid Olsen, laughed. The sound spread, nervous at first, then genuine. Morrison looked around at the faces surrounding him, saw something there that made him step back. "This isn't over," he snarled, but he was already retreating. his men following, not by half. They watched the riders disappear into dust and distance. Then, as if by collective agreement, the community turned back to the barn. Hammers resumed their rhythm. Saws bit into wood. Children played, and women gossiped, and men worked side by side regardless of origin or past prejudice. As the sun set, the new barn stood complete, glowing golden in the late light. It was different from the old one, stronger, more flexible, built with techniques that married tradition and innovation. Like the community itself, Clara thought, changed by tragedy and triumph into something new. Samuel stood apart as the celebration wound down, studying his handiwork with quiet satisfaction. Emma hadn't left his side, chattering happily about everything and nothing. The sight made Clara's heart constrict with emotions she wasn't ready to name. "It's a fine barn," she said, joining him. "It'll stand," he agreed. "Through wind and weather, it'll stand. Morrison won't give up." "No?" He looked down at Emma, who'd fallen asleep against his leg, then carefully lifted her to carry to her parents. "But neither will we." As wagons began the journey home under rising stars, Clara felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. They'd won today, not the war, perhaps, but an important battle. The community had chosen hope over fear, unity over division. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison would find other weapons, other ways to strike. The drought would deepen, the railroad would come, and change would sweep the valley whether they were ready or not. But tonight, a barn stood where ashes had been. A child slept peaceful in her father's arms because a stranger had risked everything to save her, and a community had discovered that the walls between them weren't as solid as they'd believed. It was enough, Clara decided as she and Samuel rode home through the cooling night. For now, for today, it was more than enough. The new barn glowed behind them in the moonlight, its unusual joints ready to bend without breaking, just like the people who'd built it. Together. The letter from the county clerk arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a nervous boy who wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. She read it, standing in the doorway, her coffee growing cold in her hand. 30 days to pay the back taxes plus penalties, or face foreclosure proceedings. The amount was staggering, more than the ranch had earned in the past 2 years combined. Samuel found her sitting at the kitchen table an hour later. The letter spread before her like a declaration of war. He read it silently, his jaw tightening with each line. "Morrison," he said simply. "Morrison." Clara rubbed her temples, fighting the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. "He must have bought the old liens when the bank sold them, been sitting on them, waiting for the right moment. We'll fight it." "With what?" She gestured helplessly at the ledgers. "Even if we sold every animal, every piece of equipment, it wouldn't be enough. And without the water rights." She trailed off, unable to finish. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Mustangs." Clara looked up sharply. "What?" "North of here, past Cathedral Rock, there's a herd of wild horses. Been watching them for weeks when I checked the fence lines. Good stock, strong blood lines. At least 40 head, if we could capture them. Break the best for saddle, sell the others. That's dangerous work, and we'd need help. Supplies we don't have. I can do it." His eyes held that quiet certainty she'd come to trust. "My mother's people. We knew horses before we knew anything else. Give me a week, maybe 2. I can bring in enough to make a difference." Clara studied his face, seeing the determination there. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. "You can't do it alone." "I won't be alone." He stood, decision made. Tom Bradley's been asking to learn. The Olsen boys know horses. Even Paul Garrett might help. After what happened, we build a community effort, like the barn. Hope, fragile as spring ice, began to form in Clara's chest. "When?" "Tomorrow. We'll need to scout first, plan the approach, But Clara, he paused, something shifting in his expression. Win or lose, things need saying first. The air between them suddenly felt charged, like the moments before lightning strikes. Clara stood slowly, aware of her heartbeat, of the way morning light caught in his hair. Samuel, let me speak. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. I came here in chains, angry at the world, at God, at everything. You gave me freedom, but more than that, you gave me dignity, purpose, a place to belong. You earned those things, Clara whispered. Maybe, but you saw they were possible, when I'd forgotten. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step away. When she didn't, he touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. I've been telling myself stories about why this couldn't be, about what people would say, what it would cost you. But if we might lose everything anyway, then we should choose what we'd regret not saying. Clara covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. I've been so careful for so long, being the proper widow, keeping the right distance, following all the rules. And what has it gotten me? An empty house and a failing ranch and a heart that aches every time you walk away. Clara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. She stepped into his arms like coming home. The first kiss was tentative, a question asked and answered. The second was deeper, carrying 6 weeks of denial and desire, of careful distances suddenly collapsed. His hands framed her face like she was something precious, something that might break or vanish. I love you, she breathed against his mouth. I think I have since you fixed that pump and made the water flow again. He pulled back just enough to see her face. You saved me first. Then we saved each other. She traced the line of his jaw, marveling at being allowed to touch. Whatever happens with the ranch, with Morrison, with all of it, I need you to know that. You're not just a hired hand. Samuel, you haven't been for a long time. His response was to kiss her again, deeper this time, with a hunger that matched her own. They swayed together in the morning kitchen, holding tight to this moment of truth between them. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he said, when we've saved the ranch or lost it, when Morrison's played his last card, we need to talk about the future. Our future. Yes. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. A relationship between them would scandalize the valley, might cost them friends they'd only just won, but standing here in his arms, Clara couldn't bring herself to care. Whatever comes, we'll face it. Together. Together. They spent the day in a haze of new intimacy, hands brushing as they worked. Shared glances heavy with promise. But as evening approached, reality reasserted itself. There was planning to do, help to recruit, a desperate gamble to prepare. The rain began just after supper, a gentle patter that soon grew to a steady downpour. Clara stood at the window watching it fall, hardly believing. Rain in the dry season was rare as mercy, precious as gold. It's a sign, Samuel said from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. The land's blessing us, or warning us. But she smiled as she said it, tilting her head to accept his kiss on her neck. Will the rain help with the mustangs? It'll slow them down, make the ground soft for tracking, but it'll make our job harder too. His hand splayed across her stomach, holding her close. Clara, there's something else. The white arrowhead. She turned in his arms. What about it? He was quiet for a moment, choosing words. It was my mother's, a protection charm, passed down through generations. She gave it to me before she died, said it would guard me until I found where I belonged. He reached into his pocket, drew out the small white stone she'd seen him carry. I want you to have it. Samuel, I can't. Please. He pressed it into her hand, closing her fingers around it. I found where I belong. Here, with you. Let it protect what we're building together. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She understood the weight of this gift, the trust it represented. I'll keep it safe. I know. He kissed her forehead, then her lips. Just like you've kept me safe. The storm intensified outside, turning the windows into sheets of running water. The sound was like music after months of drought, promising green grass and full streams. Clara led Samuel to the sofa, where they sat entwined, planning and dreaming in equal measure. We'll need ropes, he said, his voice rumbling against her ear. Good ones, and at least 6 riders who know what they're doing. I can ride, and I'm fair with a rope. No. His arms tightened. It's too dangerous. If something happened to you, something could happen to you too. She sat up to look at him directly. Partners, remember I won't sit home wringing my hands while you risk everything. He studied her face, reading the determination there. You're not going to budge on this. Not an inch. Stubborn woman. But he was smiling as he pulled her back against him. All right, but you follow my lead out there. Wild horses are unpredictable. And a stampede. I'll be careful. She sealed the promise with a kiss that quickly deepened into something more. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling pins free until it tumbled around her shoulders. Samuel? You're so beautiful. He traced her collarbone with reverent fingers. I've wanted to touch you like this since that first night, when you bandaged my hands. Clara caught his hand, pressed it flat against her heart so he could feel its racing. Then touch me. We've wasted enough time being careful. The storm rattled the windows, cocooning them in a world of water and wind. Samuel's kisses trailed down her throat as her hands mapped the broad planes of his chest through his shirt. Every touch was discovery, every sigh a revelation. Kiss me all over, she whispered against his ear, surprising herself with her boldness. He groaned, pulling back to look at her with eyes gone dark with desire. Darlin, I aim to please, he murmured, voice rough with want. His lips found her skin with deliberate tenderness, each kiss a promise, a claim, a prayer. They moved together on the narrow sofa, clothes loosening under eager hands, skin meeting skin in the lamplight. Samuel worshipped her with patient attention, his kisses painting fire across her shoulders, her arms, the sensitive skin of her wrists. Clara arched beneath his touch, feeling more alive than she had in years. I love you, he said against her skin, the words muffled but clear. Whatever happens tomorrow, next week, next year, I love you. Clara Whitford. She pulled him up to kiss him properly, pouring all her answer into the meeting of their mouths. Outside, the storm raged on, but here in their circle of light and warmth, there was only this 2 people choosing each other despite the odds, because of them. Later, they lay entwined on the sofa, a quilt pulled over their cooling skin. Clara traced lazy patterns on Samuel's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady under her palm. No regrets? He asked softly. None. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. You. Only that we waited so long. She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. 6 weeks is hardly... 6 weeks of watching you and wanting you and telling myself 100 reasons why it couldn't be. He tilted her chin up to kiss her again. 6 weeks of torture. Well then, she shifted to straddle his lap, smiling at his sharp intake of breath. We'd better make up for lost time. The storm finally exhausted itself near dawn, leaving the world washed clean and new. Clara woke in her own bed they'd moved there sometime in the night with Samuel curved around her like a shield. She lay still, memorizing this moment, the weight of his arm across her waist, the warm breath stirring her hair, the peace of being held. But peace couldn't last. There were Mustangs to catch, a ranch to save, a future to fight for. Clara turned in Samuel's arms. waking him with gentle kisses until his eyes fluttered open. "Morning," she whispered. "Morning." His smile was sleepy and utterly content. Still no regrets? Still none, though we should probably get up before... A knock at the door made them both freeze. Clara's heart hammered as she grabbed her wrapper, trying to finger-comb her wild hair into submission. "Who is it?" she called. "Tom Bradley, ma'am. Samuel asked me to come early to discuss the Mustang plan." Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. She glanced at Samuel, who was struggling not to laugh at her mortified expression. I'll be right down. Tom, just give me a moment." "Yes, ma'am. I'll wait by the barn." They dressed quickly, stealing kisses between buttons and boots. At the bedroom door, Samuel caught her hand. "We'll be more careful," he said. "I won't have your reputation." "My reputation's my concern." She squeezed his fingers. "But yes, we'll be discreet. For now." They went down separately, maintaining the fiction of propriety. But as Clara watched Samuel stride toward the barn where Tom waited, she touched the white arrowhead now hanging at her throat. "Protected," he'd said, "blessed." Despite everything Morrison's threats, the impossible debt, the challenges ahead, Clara felt both those things. Protected by this man who'd risk everything for wild horses and lost causes. Blessed by a love she'd never expected to find again. The Mustangs were waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. So was Morrison, and drought, and all the harsh realities of frontier life. But this morning, with rain-washed earth sparkling in the sun and Samuel's taste still on her lips, Clara chose hope. They would catch those horses, save the ranch, build a life together that neither convention nor prejudice could destroy. And if that was foolish optimism, well, she'd already proven herself partial to beautiful, dangerous, foolish things. The white arrowhead caught the morning light as she walked toward the barn, toward Samuel, toward whatever came next. Together, the Mustangs moved like water across the valley floor, their dark bodies flowing between sagebrush and stone. Samuel lay flat against the ridge, watching through Jacob's field glasses while Clara and the others waited below with the horses. 5 days of tracking had brought them here, to this box canyon where the herd came for water. 43 head, he murmured to Tom Bradley, who scribbled notes with academic precision. The stallion's that big bay, see how he keeps circling. He's smart, been wild all his life. Tom squinted through the heat shimmer. "The plan will work." "Has to." Samuel studied the canyon walls, measuring distances and angles. "Once they're inside, we spring the gate. Then it's just patience and rope work." They'd built the trap over 3 days, a makeshift corral using the canyon's natural walls, reinforced with timber and brush. Lars Olsen's boys had proven invaluable, their Norwegian stubbornness matching the brutal work. Even Paul Garrett had come, bringing supplies and an extra pair of hands. But as Samuel watched the herd drift closer to their trap, unease prickled along his spine. The morning was too quiet. Even the ever-present ravens had gone silent. "Something's wrong," he said. Tom looked up from his notes. "What do you mean?" Before Samuel could answer, dust rose on the eastern horizon. Riders, moving fast, too many to count through the haze. But Samuel's gut told him everything he needed to know. "Morrison," he grabbed Tom's shoulder. "Get to the others. Tell them." The crack of a rifle split the air. The Mustangs exploded into motion, wheeling away from the water and thundering back across the open valley. Months of work. Their last hope. Vanishing in a cloud of dust and chaos. "No," Clara's voice carried up from below, anguished and fierce. Samuel half slid down the ridge, Tom stumbling behind. The others had already mounted Clara on her sorrel, the Olsen boys ready with ropes. Paul Garrett's face grim with determination. "They're driving them off." Clara's eyes blazed with fury. Morrison's men are hazing the herd. Through the dust, Samuel could see the riders, now 8 men, firing pistols in the air, whooping like demons as they pushed the mustangs further from the trap. At their head rode Pike, Morrison's foreman, his scarred face split by a vicious grin. "Mount up," Samuel commanded, swinging onto the bay mare. "We can still save some of them." "Samuel, no," Paul warned. "They're armed. This could go bad fast." "It's already bad." Samuel gathered his reins. "Anyone who wants to ride with me, come on. Anyone who doesn't, no shame in it." Clara spurred her horse to his side without hesitation. Tom followed. Then the Olsen boys. After a moment's pause, Paul came too. They charged down the valley, eating dust and distance. The mustangs were scattering now, the careful herd breaking into smaller bands. Samuel focused on a group of 7 mostly mares, heavy with foal, slower than the rest. "There," he pointed. "We take those." But Morrison's men had seen them coming. Pike wheeled his mount, raising his rifle. "That's far enough. Tall Bear, this is open range. You got no claim here." "Neither do you," Clara shouted back. "These are wild horses on public land." "Not anymore." Pike's grin widened. "Mr. Morrison filed claim on this whole valley yesterday. Mineral rights and all. You're trespassing." Samuel felt the trap closing. Of course, Morrison had been watching, waiting for them to make their move. Every step they'd taken had been anticipated, countered. But the mares were so close, close enough to save, if they moved fast. "Clara," he said quietly, "when I move, you go left. Tom and Paul. Right. Olsen's. Straight through. We can split their attention. Maybe—" "I don't think so." The voice came from behind. They turned to find more riders emerging from the rocks, the Harmon brothers and 3 others, all armed. They'd been surrounded before they even knew it. "Drop the ropes," Josiah Harmon ordered, nice and easy. "You can't do this," Paul Garrett's voice shook with rage. "Sheriff McKenna is 10 miles away." Pike finished. "And by the time he gets here, won't be nothing to see but honest ranch hands protecting Mr. Morrison's interests." The mustangs were distant specks now, taking with them any hope of saving Clara's ranch. Samuel's hands clenched on the reins, calculating odds. 8 men with guns against their 6, half of them barely knowing which end of a pistol to hold. "Don't," Clara said softly, reading his tension. "It's not worth dying for." "Your ranch is just land," her voice broke on the words, but her spine stayed straight. "Let them go." They dropped their ropes. Pike's men collected them with rough efficiency, one making a point of shouldering Tom hard enough to nearly unhorse him. "Smart woman." Pike drawled, "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're all going to ride back to town, nice and peaceful. You're going to forget about playing with wild horses. And if any of you think about causing trouble—" He aimed his rifle casually at Samuel's chest. "Well, Indians who threaten white folks tend to have accidents. Fatal ones." "You threatening murder in front of witnesses?" Paul demanded. "I'm discussing the sad realities of frontier justice." Pike's scarred face showed no emotion. "Ask yourself, Garrett, when push comes to shove. Who's the law gonna believe, upstanding citizens protecting property rights, or a bunch of fools following a half-breed?" The slur hung in the air like smoke. Samuel felt Clara tense beside him. Saw Tom's hand twitch toward the pistol he'd barely learned to use. One wrong move and blood would spill, starting something that couldn't be stopped. "We're going," Samuel said, putting all his authority into the words. "Everyone, now." They turned their horses. Dignity, the only thing Morrison's men couldn't steal. But as they rode away, Pike called out one more time. "Hey, Tall Bear almost forgot. Mr. Morrison wanted me to give you a message. Says to tell the widow her time's up. She can take his latest offer, or she can take nothing. But either way, she's done playing rancher." Clara's knuckles went white on her reins, but she didn't turn. They rode in bitter silence until Morrison's men were specks in the distance. Only then did she let her shoulders slump. "It's over," she whispered. "We lost." "Not yet." Samuel moved his horse closer, wishing he could take her hand. "There's still time. We could try again. Find another herd." With what supplies, what money? Tears tracked through the dust on her face. Face it, Samuel. He won. Morrison won. They made camp that night in a grove of cottonwoods, too demoralized to push for home. Tom had gone quiet, scribbling in his journal with focused intensity. The Olsen boys tended the horses in subdued silence. Paul Garrett stared into the fire like it held answers to impossible questions. Samuel found Clara standing apart, looking up at stars just emerging in the darkening sky. He approached carefully, reading grief in every line of her body. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what you tried. We all tried." She turned to him, attempting a smile that broke his heart. "Maybe it was always foolish, thinking we could change things. Morrison owns the judges, the water, probably half the territorial government. What's one widow and a—" She stopped, but he heard the words she didn't say. "And an Indian." He finished it for her, gentle but honest. "The what you were going to say?" "No, I was going to say a good man. The best man I know." She stepped into his arms, uncaring who might see. "This isn't your fault." "Isn't it if you hadn't bought my freedom? Hadn't challenged Morrison publicly? Then I'd have lost the ranch anyway, just slower." She pressed her face against his chest. "At least this way I fought. We fought. That has to count for something." He held her as the stars emerged fully, feeling the tremors that ran through her strong frame. Behind them, he heard Tom approach, then hesitate. "What is it?" Samuel asked without turning. "I've been thinking." Tom's voice held a strange note. "About what Pike said, the mineral claim. It doesn't make sense." Clara pulled away slightly. "What do you mean?" "The canyon where we built the trap, I've been surveying it for days. There's no mineral deposits there, no gold sign, no silver, nothing but sandstone and scrub." Tom stepped closer, his journal clutched like a weapon. For Morrison to file a mineral claim, he'd need an assayer's report, a survey showing probable deposits. So, Paul had joined them, drawn by the conversation. He probably had one of his tame experts write something up. That's fraud. Tom's eyes gleamed in the firelight. Federal fraud, the kind even Morrison can't buy his way out of. Hope, dangerous and sharp, began to kindle in Samuel's chest. "You're sure about there being no minerals?" "I'd stake my reputation on it. My father taught me geology before I could properly walk. That canyon's as barren as they come." Tom flipped through his journal. "But here's the real question, why claim it at all, unless—" "Unless he knew we were using it," Clara finished. "He was watching us, planning this." "Which means he filed recently, within the last week." Tom snapped the journal shut. "Those documents are public record. If we could prove he filed a false claim—" "We'd need evidence," Paul said slowly. "Real evidence. The kind that would stand up in federal court." Samuel's mind raced. "The assayer's report would be filed with the claim, if we could see it. Compare it to actual samples from the canyon." "That's a lot of ifs," Clara warned. But hope had crept into her voice too. "And Morrison's not going to just hand over documents that could hang him." "No," Tom agreed. "But he might not have a choice. Federal marshals don't care much about local politics. If we could get word to the territorial capital, file a formal complaint." They talked through the night, plans becoming more solid as stars wheeled overhead. It was a desperate chance, requiring split-second timing and no small amount of luck. But it was a chance. Dawn found them mounted and ready. The events of yesterday transformed from defeat to motivation. They'd lost the Mustangs, but perhaps they'd found something better, a weapon Morrison wouldn't see coming. "Tom, you and Paul head for the Capitol," Samuel decided. "Take the evidence Tom's gathered, file the complaint. The rest of us will go back to town. Act like we've given up. Let Morrison think he's won." "What about the ranch?" Clara asked. "The deadline? We stall. Ask for an extension to arrange affairs. Buy Tom time to get federal attention." Samuel met each of their eyes in turn. "It's dangerous. If Morrison suspects—" "He won't," Paul said firmly. "Because I'm going to accept his offer to buy out my water shares. Let him think I've switched sides." Clara's eyes widened. "Paul, no." "It's strategy." The rancher's weathered face was set with determination. "He sees me coming to heel. He'll relax, get overconfident. Meanwhile, I'll have his ear, maybe learn something useful." Samuel felt a surge of respect for these people who'd become allies. Friends. Family of choice. "All right, but everyone needs to understand if this goes wrong, Morrison won't stop at taking land. He'll come for blood." "Then we'd better not let it go wrong," Tom said simply. They parted ways at the crossroads. Tom and Paul heading east while the others returned to face Morrison's victory. Samuel rode beside Clara, noting how she sat straighter in the saddle now, animated by purpose. "Think it will work?" she asked. "I think we have to try." He allowed their legs to brush as the horses walked close. "But Clara, if it doesn't—" "Don't," she cut him off with a look. "We're going to win. We have to, because the alternative is letting men like Morrison decide who belongs and who doesn't, who matters and who's expendable." Her chin lifted. "I won't live in that world. Not anymore." They created a rise and saw dry rock spread below, Morrison's flag flying from the bank building like a conqueror's banner. But Samuel remembered another flag, the one his grandmother had described, flying over a very different nation before men like Morrison carved it up for profit. Change came slow, she'd said, but it came. "Together?" Clara asked, reading his thoughts as she so often did now. "Together," he confirmed. They rode down toward the town, toward the fight, toward a future that would be won with law instead of lead, with paper instead of pistols. It wasn't the ending Samuel had imagined when he'd watched the Mustangs run free. But maybe it was better, because justice, real justice, lasted longer than bullets. And if they could prove that even someone like Morrison had to answer to the law, well, that would be worth more than all the wild horses in the territory. The game had changed. Time to play by new rules. The federal marshal arrived on a Tuesday morning, his badge catching the light as he stepped off the stagecoach. Clara watched from her porch as Morrison emerged from the bank, his usual swagger faltering at the sight of official authority. 3 days had passed since Tom Bradley rode for the Capitol. 3 days of careful pretense and held breath. Then, Mrs. Whitford. The marshal was younger than she'd expected, with keen eyes and a no-nonsense bearing. "I'm Marshal James Thornton. I understand you filed a complaint regarding fraudulent mineral claims." "I have." She stepped forward, aware of curtains twitching all along Main Street. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Federal government takes fraud seriously, ma'am, especially when it involves public lands." He glanced toward the bank where Morrison stood frozen. "I'll need to examine all relevant documents, including the original assayer's report." Morrison found his voice. "This is ridiculous. My claims are perfectly legitimate." "Then you'll have no problem providing documentation." Thornton's tone brooked no argument. "Sheriff McKenna, I'll require your assistance in securing these records." McKenna looked like he'd swallowed a lemon, but federal authority superseded local politics. "Yes, Marshal." What followed was a careful dance of legal maneuvering. Morrison produced papers. Thornton examined them. Tom Bradley, who'd returned that morning, provided his geological surveys. The whole town gathered to watch, drawn by the spectacle of their untouchable king finally facing judgment. Samuel stood with Clara, his presence a steady comfort as the hours stretched. Paul Garrett had proven as good as his word, keeping Morrison distracted with false loyalty while gathering intelligence. It was Paul who'd learned about the secret meeting Morrison had scheduled for tonight, out at the old mill. He's planning something. Paul had warned. Pike and the Harmon brothers, plus some men I didn't recognize. Heard them mention insurance and making sure the marshal finds nothing. Now. As afternoon wore on and Thornton's investigation deepened, Clara felt the tension ratcheting higher. Morrison's face had gone from red to white to a dangerous purple as evidence mounted against him. "These mineral assessments," Thornton finally announced, "are forgeries. The geological descriptions don't match the actual terrain, and the assayer's signature," he held up a document. "Benjamin Whitley died 2 years before this was supposedly signed." The crowd murmured. Morrison's hands clenched into fists. "Furthermore," Thornton continued, "I found evidence of systematic fraud involving multiple claims throughout the valley. Sheriff, I'm placing Dale Morrison under arrest for violation of federal law." "You can't," Morrison exploded. "I own this town. I made it what it is." "What you made," Clara said, stepping forward, "was a kingdom built on lies and theft, and kingdoms fall." Morrison's eyes found hers, deadly cold. "This isn't over." "Yes," she said simply, "it is." But as McKenna moved to arrest Morrison, Pike appeared at the bank door. "Boss riders coming fast." Through the settling dust, Clara saw them 12 men, hard-faced and armed. Not Morrison's usual hired hands, but professionals, the kind of men who solved problems with bullets. "Nobody moves." The lead rider dismounted, hand on his pistol. "Mister, Morrison's got legal representation coming. Until then, he stays free." Thornton's hand moved to his own weapon. "Federal Marshal, stand down." "Don't think so, Marshal." The gunman smiled without warmth. "See, you're outnumbered and outgunned. Smart play is to ride out while you can." The street crackled with tension. Clara felt Samuel shift beside her, positioning himself between her and potential violence. All their careful plans, their legal victory, balanced on the edge of bloodshed. Then Tom Bradley did something unexpected. The young man stepped forward, journal in hand, voice carrying clear across the square. "Every word of this is being documented," he announced. "Names, faces, threats against a federal officer. My father may just be a small-town doctor, but my mother's brother is Senator Bradley of Missouri. Perhaps you've heard of him." The gunman's smile faltered. Political connections carried weight, even on the frontier. "Additionally," Tom continued with academic calm, "I've already sent copies of all evidence to the territorial governor, 3 federal judges, and 2 newspapers. Killing us won't stop what's coming." "He's bluffing," Morrison snarled. "Am I?" Tom pulled out a telegraph receipt. "Sent this morning. Replies should arrive within hours." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Marshal Thornton spoke, voice steady as iron. "Gentlemen, you have 2 choices. Disperse now and ride out of the territory, or face federal warrants by nightfall. I guarantee you won't like federal prison." The gunmen exchanged glances. Their leader calculated odds, then holstered his weapon. "This ain't worth a noose. Sorry, Morrison, you're on your own." They mounted and rode, leaving Morrison standing alone in the street. His empire, built on fear and greed, crumbled in minutes once its foundation was exposed. "Dale Morrison," Thornton said formally, "you're under arrest." This time, no one interfered. McKenna cuffed the man who'd ruled the valley like a king, and suddenly he looked small, ordinary, just another schemer whose reach had exceeded his grasp. But Clara knew it wasn't quite over. Pike and the Harmon brothers were still out there, and cornered animals were dangerous. as if reading her thoughts. Samuel touched her arm. "The meeting at the mill," he murmured. "They'll still come." She nodded. They'd planned for this, a final trap to catch the rest of Morrison's network, but it meant putting themselves at risk one more time. As evening fell, Clara and Samuel rode out with Thornton and a small posse. The old mill sat beside Dry Creek, abandoned since the mine played out, perfect for clandestine meetings and dark deeds. They positioned themselves carefully, Clara insisting on participating despite Samuel's protests. She carried Jacob's rifle and wore his old coat, prepared for whatever came. They didn't wait long. Pike arrived first, then the Harmons, then others, including Reverend Blackwood, which shouldn't have surprised her, but did. They gathered inside the mill, voices carrying through broken walls. "Me Morrison's finished." Pike was saying, "But that doesn't mean the ranch deeds, the water rights, they're still valid. We take what we planned, split it among us." "What about the marshal?" Josiah Harmon asked. "Accident on the road back to the capital. These trails are dangerous at night." Pike's laugh was ugly. "The Indian and the widow, too. Clean slate." Clara felt Samuel tense beside her. This was the confession they needed, but hearing their murders planned so casually sent ice through her veins. Marshal Thornton gave the signal. They moved in fast, weapons drawn, catching the conspirators flat-footed, but Pike was a survivor. He dove for cover, came up shooting. The mill exploded into chaos. Gunfire echoed off stone walls. Clara found herself separated from Samuel, ducking behind an old grindstone as bullets whined overhead. She caught glimpses of the fight, Thornton exchanging fire with Pike, the Harmons trying to flee, Blackwood cowering behind overturned equipment. Then she saw him. Josiah Harmon had circled around, had his gun aimed at Samuel's back. Without thinking, Clara raised Jacob's rifle and fired. Rock salt, not lead she couldn't bring herself to kill, but it was enough. Harmon screamed, dropping his weapon, clutching his peppered shoulder. Samuel spun, saw what had happened, and his eyes met Clara's across the battlefield. In that moment, she saw everything: gratitude, love, and fierce pride in her courage. The fight ended quickly after that. Pike made a desperate rush for the door and ran straight into Lars Olsson's massive fist. The Norwegian had insisted on joining the posse. The Harmons surrendered, blubbering about Morrison making them do it. Blackwood tried to claim he was there to minister to sinners, until Tom produced notes showing his financial stake in the land grab. "Load them up," Thornton ordered. "Federal prison has room for them all." As the conspirators were led away, Clara found herself standing with Samuel beside the creek, the same water that had been denied her, fought over, nearly killed for. In the moonlight, it looked like silver. "It's over," she said, hardly believing it. "The legal parts, maybe." Samuel pulled her close. "But Clara, what happens now? The town's seen us together, fighting together. There'll be talk." "Let them talk." She turned in his arms to face him. "I'm done living by other people's rules. The ranch is mine, free and clear. The water rights will be restored, and I choose who stands beside me. Even if that someone is the man I love." She silenced his protests with a kiss. "The man who helped save my land, my life, my soul. I don't care what blood runs in your veins. Samuel, I care about your heart." He held her tightly, and she felt the last of his walls come down. "Then I choose too. I choose you. Clara, today, tomorrow, for all the days we have." They returned to town to find celebration in full swing. Morrison's arrest had broken a spell over Dry Rock, and people who'd lived in fear were suddenly free. The Garretts had opened their home for a gathering, and even some who'd stood with Morrison were there, seeking redemption or at least accommodation with the new order. Paul Garrett raised a glass as they entered. "To justice, and to those brave enough to fight for it." The toast was echoed throughout the room. Clara found herself embraced by Martha Garrett, kissed by Ingrid Olsson. congratulated by people who'd once crossed streets to avoid her. The change wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was real. And Mrs. Whitford. A small voice piped up. Emma Garrett pushed through the crowd, clutching something in her hands. I made this for you and Mr. Samuel. It was a cloth doll, crudely stitched but made with love. An angel, Emma explained, to guard their door and keep them safe. Clara's eyes misted as she knelt to hug the child, this little girl who'd nearly died, who'd been saved by courage and sacrifice, now offering her own gift of protection. It's perfect, she told Emma. We'll treasure it always. Later, much later. Clara stood on her porch watching the sun rise over land that was truly hers. The ranch stretched out before her, no longer threatened by drought or debt. Samuel emerged from the barn, having fed the horses, and crossed the yard with that easy grace she'd never tire of watching. Regrets? He asked, joining her on the porch. None. She leaned into his warmth. You? Only that it took chains to bring me here. He pressed a kiss to her hair. But maybe that's how it had to be, both of us breaking free of different kinds of bondage. They'd decided to marry, quietly, with just the Olsons and Garretts as witnesses. Not everyone would accept it, but enough would, and in time, as Tom Bradley said, minds could change. They'd already seen it happen. The ranch would prosper. They'd catch those Mustangs eventually, build the horse-breeding operation Samuel envisioned. The water flowed clear and strong from the repaired well, and the desert was already showing signs of green after the unexpected rains. Morrison would stand trial in federal court. His empire would be broken up. The land returned to those he'd cheated. Some of his men would serve time. Others would drift away to other schemes in other places. But their hold on the valley was broken forever. What are you thinking? Samuel asked. Clara smiled, touching the white arrowhead at her throat. That grandmother of yours was right. We found where we belong. Here. Together. She turned to kiss him properly as the morning light painted everything gold. That's home enough for me. Inside the house, Emma's angel doll sat on the mantel, standing guard over their new life. Outside, the ranch stirred to life, chickens pecking, horses nickering, the eternal rhythm of land and seasons and survival. But survival meant more than just enduring now. It meant choosing love over fear, community over isolation, justice over the easy path. It meant two people from different worlds building something new in the space between. The sun climbed higher, chasing away the last shadows of night. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried wild and free and unafraid, just like the life Clara and Samuel would build together, one careful day at a time. The Whitford Ranch stood ready for whatever came next, and this time they'd meet it standing together, united in purpose and love, proof that sometimes the most unlikely people could create the strongest homes. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night Channel and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover and enjoy this story. Your support means the world and helps bring more tales of courage, love, and justice from the American frontier.